Screeching sirens tore through the twilight as a cacophony of excited chatter and clattering footsteps spilled onto the quiet streets of Cedar Ridge. I had just stepped outside to check on the evening's peace when I noticed something wildly out of place. A cluster of tents and campfires dotting my expansive field. My heart skipped a beat. As I strained my eyes in the fading light, I recognized the unmistakable sight of dozens of people milling around, neighbors and strangers alike, camping on what I had always considered my private land. At first, I thought it was some sort of community festival, but then the truth hit me like a freight train. HoA Karen had orchestrated this invasion. Known for her obsession with enforcing uniform perfection in our gated community, Karen had decided that my unsightly property was the perfect venue for her latest project, inviting 100 people to camp on my land without my permission. Her plan, intended to shame me and force me into conformity, had backfired spectacularly. I felt a surge of anger mixed with a spark of mischievous inspiration. In that charged moment, a wild idea formed in my mind. I had always prided myself on running my own show here in Cedar Ridge, and I had one secret weapon up my sleeve, a pack of fiercely loyal guard dogs, trained to protect my property and deter any unwelcome guests. Now, Karen's grand camping escapade was about to face an unexpected twist, a twist that would leave her reeling. The night was still young, and while the campers laughed and celebrated, I quietly activated my security system. I watched through my surveillance feed as one by one, curious visitors wandered near the perimeter of my property, unaware of the silent watchers lurking in the shadows. I could almost hear the distant barks growing louder as my guard dogs stirred from their slumber, sensing an intrusion into their territory. In that electric moment, I knew that Karen's grand plan was about to be upended. Today, she would learn that in Cedar Ridge, when you try to take over someone's land, nature and my loyal pack fight back. And as the first hints of canine alertness echoed in the night, I smiled, knowing that this was going to be one for the history books. Cedar Ridge was a picturesque, gated community known for its immaculate lawns, private estates, and a homeowners association that prided itself on enforcing an almost militaristic level of order. Every resident was expected to adhere to a strict set of guidelines. Perfectly trimmed hedges, identical landscaping, and a lifestyle of understated luxury. In this environment, deviations were met with swift action and a barrage of complaints. At the center of this regime was Karen Mitchell, known to all as HoA Karen. In her early 50s, Karen carried an air of self-appointed authority. Always dressed in tailored outfits and armed with a clipboard and smartphone, she roamed Cedar Ridge like a modern-day sentinel. Whether it was a mismatched mailbox or an unapproved garden decoration, nothing escaped her vigilant gaze. Her relentless enforcement of the community's rigid rules earned her both admiration and resentment in equal measure. I, on the other hand, was a longtime resident with a reputation for independence. My property, a sprawling estate that I inherited from my family, was my sanctuary, a place where I could blend modern comforts with the rugged beauty of nature. I had invested in renewable energy systems, sustainable agriculture, and yes, even a well-trained pack of guard dogs. My land was not just a home. It was a testament to hard work, creativity, and the freedom to live by my own rules. While many in Cedar Ridge adhered strictly to the HoA's dictates, I believe that true living came from embracing individuality and innovation. My estate, with its winding driveways, open pastures, and a garden that defied conformity, was a constant source of envy for those who longed to break free from the stifling uniformity of the community. I had built my life here with a sense of pride, and I wasn't about to let anyone, especially not Karen, take that away from me. The stage was set for conflict. Over the years, Karen had targeted many residents for minor infractions, but she had never dared to cross the line into personal territory. That all changed when she decided, without any consultation or permission, to invite 100 campers onto my land. Her invasion wasn't subtle. It was a bold, in-your-face display of power meant to humiliate me in front of the entire community. Tents, campfires, and even a makeshift stage had sprung up overnight, transforming my once private fields into a chaotic campsite. Neighbors whispered their dismay, some secretly thrilled at the prospect of seeing Karen's overreach exposed, while others worried about the disruption to the community's order. I watched in disbelief as Karen strutted around with a self-satisfied smile, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I knew that if I didn't act fast, this challenge to my property rights would continue unchecked. And that's when I remembered my secret: a pack of highly trained guard dogs, raised on my estate and fiercely loyal to me. These dogs were more than just pets. They were guardians bred and trained to protect my land from any intrusion. I had always kept them under the radar, knowing that in Cedar Ridge, not everyone appreciated a bit of rugged authenticity. With my resolve hardening, I prepared to reclaim my property. I would use every resource at my disposal, not just to drive away Karen's campers, but to send a message that in Cedar Ridge, property rights were inviolable. Karen's carefully orchestrated invasion was about to meet a response that was as creative as it was decisive. The chaos unfolded quickly. In the early hours of the morning, as the campers began settling into their tents and the smell of grilled food mingled with fresh dew, I activated my security cameras and quietly monitored the scene from my study. The digital clock on my computer confirmed that it was just after 4 a.m., well before most residents would expect any unusual activity. And there, on the far edge of my property, I saw them, a group of about 100 people, gathered in clusters, laughing and talking around campfires that they had set up without any permission. I immediately pieced together Karen's grand scheme. Through neighborhood chats and a quick scan of the community forum, it became clear that Karen had sent out a series of invitations earlier the previous night. Her message was curt, forceful, and entirely uninvited. Join us on my land for a weekend of community bonding. It was a blatant abuse of her position and a deliberate attempt to assert control over my property. Fury mixed with a spark of mischief. I knew that if Karen thought she could simply commandeer my land, she would soon learn that I was not someone to be trifled with. I began compiling every piece of evidence: timestamp video clips showing the arrival of the campers, screenshots of Karen's messages posted on the community forum, and even audio recordings of her exasperated instructions over the phone as she coordinated the camping operation. But evidence alone wouldn't suffice. I needed to strike back in a way that would be impossible to ignore. That's when I remembered my secret weapon, my guard dogs. For years, I had trained them not just to be protectors, but also to be a deterrent, a living symbol of the boundaries that no one should cross. The dogs were well-disciplined, and under my command, they could be unleashed to patrol the perimeter and send a clear, unequivocal message: this land is private, and trespassers will face the consequences. I began to mobilize my canine guardians. Quietly, so as not to alert the invaders, I sent out discreet commands through a secure radio system. One by one, my dogs emerged from their kennels, their eyes alert and their ears pricked for any sign of intruders. I watched as they moved stealthily along the edges of my property, their presence an invisible shield that would soon make itself known. Meanwhile, Karen was oblivious to the storm brewing. Throughout the night, she had paraded around the campsite, checking her clipboard, making phone calls, and ensuring that every camper was accounted for. In her mind, she was the epitome of civic duty, a guardian of community standards. But little did she know that her grand invasion was about to meet an equally grand response. By mid-morning, as the sun began to rise higher, the tension reached a boiling point. One of the campers, curious and slightly intoxicated, wandered too close to my property's boundary. The guard dogs, trained for such intrusions, sprang into action. Their barks, sharp and commanding, echoed across the field, startling the intruder and sending him scurrying back toward the campsite. The sudden commotion rippled through the group, and soon whispers of guard dogs and "this isn't our land" began to circulate among the campers. I seized the moment to post a live update on the community forum. I shared video clips of my dogs patrolling the boundary, along with a message that read, "Our property is not a playground. Respect the boundaries or face the consequences." The digital response was immediate. Neighbors cheered, supportive comments flooded in, and hashtags like hashtag #GuardDogJustice and hashtag #NotYourLand started trending locally. Karen, meanwhile, grew increasingly agitated. I caught snippets of her frantic phone calls as she tried to rally the campers, demanding they remain on her designated community ground. But with every call, the evidence mounted. My security footage showed not only the unauthorized camping, but also the disciplined, intimidating presence of my guard dogs. It was a clear message. You may have invaded my land, but you will not be allowed to disrespect it. Determined to take the fight to the next level, I compiled a digital dossier of all evidence and prepared to confront the HOA board. I drafted a detailed complaint, complete with timestamps, video clips, and screenshots of Karen's messages. My argument was simple. Karen had overstepped her bounds by inviting 100 people onto my private property without permission, and in doing so, she had violated my property rights. And now, thanks to her hubris, she would learn that my land and my guard dogs were not to be trifled with. By the end of the day, the community was abuzz with anticipation for the final showdown. The digital petition demanding accountability for Karen's actions quickly gathered thousands of signatures, and every shared post and comment reinforced the fact that our rights as homeowners were at stake. The stage was set for a dramatic escalation, a confrontation that would force the HOA board to confront not only Karen's abuses, but the broader implications of allowing one individual to overreach at the expense of others. In the wake of my live update and the subsequent social media frenzy, the situation on my property escalated dramatically. The digital evidence of Karen's unauthorized camping invasion and the impressive display of my guard dogs quickly spread throughout Cedar Ridge. Hashtags like hashtag #NotYourLand and hashtag #GuardDogJustice became rallying cries as residents, long tired of arbitrary HOA interventions, expressed their support for my cause. Local news outlets jumped on the story. Reporters arrived at the scene and interviewed shocked neighbors, capturing on camera the dramatic contrast between the organized chaos of Karen's campsite and the disciplined patrols of my canine guardians along the property line. It's like a modern-day standoff between property rights and bureaucratic overreach, one reporter commented, his tone a mix of amusement and awe. The narrative shifted from a petty dispute to a broader commentary on the right to private property and the power of community resistance. Within the HOA board, divisions that had long simmered beneath the surface now erupted into open conflict. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors, and leaked minutes revealed a deep rift among board members. Some, influenced by Karen's long-standing reputation as the enforcer of community standards, defended her actions as necessary to maintain order. Others, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and the public outcry, argued that Karen's invasion of my property was a blatant abuse of power that undermined the very principles of private ownership. Our community must stand for fairness and individual rights. One board member was quoted as saying in a leaked memo. The board's internal strife only fueled the growing movement among the residents. Online, my digital dossier, complete with security footage, timestamp photos, and video clips of my guard dog in action, became a beacon for those demanding reform. Community forums were flooded with posts discussing the importance of property rights, and digital petitions calling for strict action against Karen Baxter's unilateral actions amassed thousands of signatures in just a few days. Influential local bloggers and social media influencers began to weigh in, praising my bold stand and questioning why an HOA enforcer should have the power to dictate who could and could not use private property. When one person stands up for their rights, it empowers an entire community, one popular post read, and the sentiment was shared widely. Karen, for her part, was not silent. In a series of frantic social media updates, she insisted that her actions were justified and that she was only protecting the community's interests. But every time she tried to spin her narrative, the overwhelming digital evidence and the resounding support of the residents undermined her claims. Videos of my guard dogs barking orders at intruders and close-up shots of the carefully organized campsite on my property circulated widely, painting a clear picture of an individual who had overstepped her bounds. As the pressure mounted, the HoA board announced that a final public hearing would be held to address the incident and to reform their enforcement policies. The announcement sent shockwaves through Cedar Ridge. In the days leading up to the hearing, I continued to post live updates from my property. I showed how the guard dogs maintained a steady patrol along the boundary, and I shared testimonials from supportive neighbors who recounted their own experiences with arbitrary HoA rules. The collective energy was palpable. This was not just about my property. It was about standing up against a culture of overreach that had long suppressed the rights of individual homeowners. On the morning of the final public hearing, the community center was packed with residents, many holding signs that read "Property Rights Matter" and "No More HoA Bullying." The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and a sense of unity that had been missing for far too long. Every shared video clip and every online petition reinforced the message. If the HoA board did not act, the legacy of unchecked power and arbitrary rule enforcement would persist in Cedar Ridge. In that charged environment, every argument on social media, every comment from a neighbor, every snippet of live footage underscored the simple truth: my property is mine, and if you try to take that away, the consequences will be swift and undeniable. The stage was now set for a dramatic showdown, a final confrontation that would force the HoA board to either defend their outdated policies or embrace a new era of transparency, fairness, and respect for individual rights. The decisive moment came on a crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Ridge Community Center. The room was filled with a mix of HoA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the future of our neighborhood's enforcement policies. With a calm yet unyielding resolve, Councilwoman Rebecca Monroe stepped up to the podium, her eyes shining with the hope of a community that had grown tired of arbitrary power plays. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including security footage, detailed property logs, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Monroe began, her voice steady and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Baxter, specifically the unauthorized camping event on private property and the repeated intrusions that have disrupted our community, were not motivated by genuine concern for public safety, but by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's rights as individual property owners must be upheld, and no one should be allowed to impose their will on us through arbitrary actions. A heavy silence settled over the room as Monroe continued. Effective immediately, the HoA board will rescind any sanctions and fines imposed as a result of this incident. Furthermore, we will launch a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such overreach, and we will implement new guidelines to safeguard the property rights and personal freedoms of every resident in Cedar Ridge. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an isolated incident. It is a resounding declaration that our community will stand for fairness, accountability, and the right to live without fear of arbitrary interference. Her words resonated powerfully, and murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a well-respected community advocate, known for his unwavering commitment to individual rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should ever have to endure the tyranny of arbitrary rule enforcement. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that Cedar Ridge values truth, innovation, and the sanctity of private property above all else. We demand accountability, and we will ensure that every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a resolute call for change. Following his address, a senior officer from the local fire department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage of Karen Baxter's unauthorized activities and detailed logs that confirmed the legality of my property modifications. The evidence was irrefutable. The intrusion and subsequent unauthorized camping were clear violations of private property rights, and every attempt to justify Karen's actions was exposed as a sham. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Monroe concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Ridge, a community where every resident's rights are respected and where public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that we will no longer allow personal bias to dictate the rules of our community. Together, we stand for justice, accountability, and the right to live freely on our own property." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community had forced the HoA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Ridge. The days of petty, arbitrary rule enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Ridge experienced a profound transformation. News of the rescinded sanctions and sweeping reforms implemented by the HoA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking fervent debates about property rights, community governance, and individual freedom. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines like "A New Dawn for Cedar Ridge" and "Community United for Justice," celebrated the decisive action taken to protect the rights of every homeowner. Hashtags such as #PropertyRights, #NoMoreToBullying, and #CommunityJustice trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their own experiences and envision a future free from oppressive oversight. Neighbors who had long lived in fear of arbitrary fines and invasive inspections now spoke proudly about their right to manage their property on their own terms. "Our homes and our land are our sanctuaries," one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice echoing throughout the crowded room. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that Cedar Ridge would forever defend the freedoms of its residents. Within the reformed HoA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint was carefully scrutinized and that no resident would ever again be subject to arbitrary interference. "Our duty is to protect every homeowner's rights and dignity," Lieutenant Reed affirmed at a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our community's renewed commitment to justice. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized further by organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns that empowered residents and encouraged them to stand up for their rights. "When we stand together, we become an unstoppable force for change," a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more equitable governance system. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and transformative. My decision to retaliate against HoA Karen's egregious act of blocking my driveway, and to take matters into my own hands by digging a giant trench and installing a drawbridge, had not only reclaimed my property rights, but had also ignited a movement that resonated far beyond my own estate. Neighbors who had once been silenced by the oppressive rule of the HoA now found their voices, sharing their own stories of resistance and celebrating the triumph of individual freedom. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's misdeeds became a beacon of hope, a rallying cry for every resident who believed that property rights and personal expression should never be compromised. Karen Baxter, once the feared enforcer of arbitrary rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale. A stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community unites for justice. Her influence waned rapidly, and digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the necessity of reform and the dangers of unchecked power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Ridge, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the warm glow of a setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights," was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not only the victory of our rights over arbitrary interference, but also the strength of a community that stands together, Councilwoman Monroe proclaimed, her voice resonating with unwavering determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our freedoms and to ensure that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Cedar Ridge, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HoA Karen Baxter's reckless attempt to commandeer my property by inviting 100 campers was met with my unexpected and ingenious response, and how I defended my rights with a pack of guard dogs that caught her red-handed, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live freely. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Cedar Ridge, truth, justice, and individual freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Ridge would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual property were cherished above all else.